Bonjour tout le monde!
Allô,
Allô, donc Mathieu, je vais tout de suite te mettre
co-host.
co-host, make host.
J'ai fini de manger ma banane.
Euh,
Ça, c'était pas prévu.
donc,
Hmm.
bonjour tout le monde. On ne vous voit pas, mais on assume que vous nous entendez. Donc, on va attendre encore jusqu'à midi 5-ish, pour que tout le monde ait le temps de se connecter.
Hop. Voilà. Mon logo était pas dans le bon sens.
D'accord. Parfait, merci dans le chat de nous dire que vous nous entendez bien. C'est apprécié. Donc, on va juste continuer de suivre un petit peu les gens qui nous écrivent sur Facebook pour nous dire qu'ils veulent se connecter. Donc, Mathieu, je crois que c'est toi maintenant qui es le host. Donc, participant, il va apparaître des Admit All. Il faut que tu les see waiting room, Admit All, so that they don't get stuck.
Je m'occupe de ça.
So, yes, today the workshop is Gardening 101. So, it's the same workshop as Jardinage 101, but this one is in English.
Oh, okay.
So I was speaking French at the beginning just for the format thing and getting ready. So for those of you who speak French, this is an English workshop. We're going to record it, and the French one was recorded next week, and we're going to make it available this week. So if ever it's hard to follow, you can always listen to the French workshop. Donc, Mathieu, si tu veux muter les micros de tout le monde.
J'essaie de muter tout le monde sans te mute, toi.
J'avoue, ben, peut-être que je me remettrai host à ce moment-là.
No, it's okay for now. I'm just muting people who, de qui j'entends du son, mais sinon, pour l'instant, ça va.
D'accord. Je vais aller partager le lien sur Facebook pour la connexion. Et puis, we're going to be ready to start.
Caro, as-tu ouvert le Google Doc que je t'ai envoyé pour les questions?
Oui.
Super.
Donc, j'ai mis le lien sur Facebook. Et puis, on est parti. Donc, tout le monde est muté, mais pas moi, donc on est co-host. We're still gonna wait for 1 or 2 minutes. So, Mathieu, do you still see people trying to connect that you have to admit? Just keep admitting people.
Yep.
Okay.
What is it?
Sending away. Okay. So, my name is Carol Ann. I am not Alejandra, who was supposed to be here today because she is the manager of Urban Ag at the depot. So she is in the midst of opening all the collective gardens at once because we started later because of the COVID. So she asked me to replace her today. So I'll be your host for today. And I am with my colleague, Mathieu. Mathieu, do you want to present yourself?
Yep. Hello, my name is Mathieu, and I am the assistant coordinator of SAPUS. I will be today with you in the chat, so If you have questions, you just have to write them down on the chat. I will try to answer them. And if I'm not satisfied with my answer, I will write it for Caroline and she will answer it.
Yeah, so I'm the coordinator of SAPUS. I'm an agrologist. So I specialized in urban ag a couple of years ago because it made more sense with my values. And at the depot, we have SAPUS, who's a social economy business inside the depot. And we have the urban ag department, who is managing the collective and community gardens. So this is how things are separated, but we're still working together. And so today we are already recording the session. So if people are not comfortable with being recorded, you can just turn off your camera so we won't see your face. And like Mathieu said, through the presentation, I won't see the chat. I will be talking to you, explaining things. So he will be in charge of answering questions.
Okay.
And so the session ends at 1 and I have a meeting because it's the high season. So I will be leaving, but I will have time to answer questions before that. And Mathieu will stay with you. So if you want to continue until 1:30, it's no problem if you have any questions. And the other thing is that in these times of social distancing, we want to provide an opportunity for people to come together. So if ever when we're gone, you want to keep on talking and discussing amongst each other, we let you use the platform. The Zoom meeting will keep on going, so you can continue talking if you want to. So it's 12:05. Mathieu, are we still having new people coming in, or it's pretty good?
Yep.
Okay, so you'll keep admitting and muting.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So for those who just came in, we are recording this session. My name is Carol Ann. I'm going to start presenting now. If you don't feel comfortable being filmed or recorded, just turn off your camera so we won't see you. And after the workshop, at some point in a couple of days, we'll put the video on our website. So if you want to listen to it again, there won't be any problem. So don't hurry, take notes and stress with that. You can listen to it as many times as you want. So if it's all right with everyone, I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we look at the, So Mathieu, I think you need to put me as a host so that I can share my screen. Can you do that?
Done.
I'm not the host. All right, thanks. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So we're going to look at today's theme, which is Gardening 101. So, yeah.
So I'm going to mute myself for the presentation, but I will be in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Mathieu. Perfect. So I'll just do that. Yeah, all right. So Gardening 101. So today we want to review the basics of gardening. So we decided to divide the presentation into keywords because each of these keywords represent tasks that we do a lot during the season. They are the essential steps. So if we understand all the concepts that are behind these keywords, you're going to be able to have a good gardening season. So admit all. Perfect. All right. So the first part of the season, it starts during winter. It's the preparation. So the first keyword is planning. This is when you draw your garden and you buy your seeds and prepare for indoor seedlings. So we're going to look at how we're going to do a good planning for a season. We are going to skip the indoor seedlings part because this is a super extensive topic and it deserves a whole different workshop. So we're not going to cover that today, and neither will we cover transplanting. So we assume that indoor and transplanting will be taken care in another workshop at some point. So today, planning, and then before transplanting, how do we amend the soil? What amendment do we use? What quantity do we use? We're going to look at staking using verticality, and we're going to talk a little tiny bit about fertilizing, but this is something we're going to cover more in the next workshop, which is soil fertilization and the three sisters. So we're just going to touch a little bit on fertilizing today. And then after the plantation of the garden comes the maintenance phase of the season, which is the longest one. And in this phase, we have quite a couple of tasks to do that they all repeat themselves. So it's kind of repetitive, but it's important to understand why we do them. So we have thinning, weeding, watering, scouting, pinching, and harvesting. So you see scouting has no stars because we're going to cover that more in the diseases and insects in the garden, which is the third workshop. But all the other ones, we're going to cover them. So today, I won't be explaining or giving you precise numbers, like what's the spacing between two radish sheets, or what's the spacing between tomato plants, for example. This is something you can find in many different books on the internet. There's information aplenty on these specific aspects. I want to explain the logic, like how to plan your garden, understanding what are the plant's needs, and how do we prevent, what are the plant's main problems that we encounter while gardening, and how do we prevent them first. So let's start with plant needs. So the first one, is the most popular answer when I ask this question, what are plants needs? It's light. So plants do need a lot of light, way more than us. And it's the most limiting factor when it comes to growing plants. And this is super important, having enough light, because plants, us humans, when we want to have energy and feed ourselves, we go out and we eat plants and we eat other animals. This is our way to get energy. Whereas plants, they're amazing. They produce their own food. So they use light and water to do photosynthesis. So they use the pigment that's called chlorophyll. That gives the green color to the leaves. And this is what the plants use to do photosynthesis and produce their own food. They produce sugar out of that. So like the most limiting factor, the most important need is light for plants. And then comes the second one. That's the second one in importance is water, which you probably all know from gardening or just having indoor plants. So we realize that if we don't water them enough, they wilt, or if we water them too much, they will wilt too. And I'll explain why a bit later. So water is a need. What else? So this is one, CO2, carbon dioxide. This is one you don't really have to think about because it's already in the air. So you don't have to provide your plant with carbon dioxide. Though, and it's interesting because we're having more and more of that molecule in the atmosphere now. So it's not an issue having carbon dioxide. There's in fact too much in the atmosphere. But it's important to protect your plants from strong winds, and at the same time, in your garden, you still want to have air movement, because around your plant's leaves, if there's no air movement because they're planted too close one from each other, the carbon dioxide around the leaves can at some point be depleted. So you won't notice, but the plants will just be like at a slow pace. They will be growing at a slow pace, which is not really what you want. You'd like them to grow a full pace because you want to have more things to eat. So carbon dioxide and air movement is going to be important. So I did put here the molecule. You don't have to remember that. It's just so that you see it. And the other thing that plants need is, well, it's not soil per se. This is a picture of soil, but it's more the nutrients that are present in the soil itself. So the nutrients are divided into two types. Those that we call macronutrients and those that we call micronutrients. So macronutrients is because they are needed in larger amounts, larger quantities by the plants, whereas micro are really needed in tiny quantities. So the three main nutrients that plants need are N, P, and K. N stands for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, and K for potassium. So these three are really needed in large amounts by all the plants. And we're going to talk about this a bit more during the soil fertilization workshop. This is what you need to know for now. And when I'm saying that plants do not really need soil to grow is because you can be growing plants in the ground directly, but you can also be using techniques like hydroponic or aeroponic, where you're going to give the plants nutrients through water. Hydroponic is when the plants stand in the water, which is rich in nutrients. And aeroponics, the roots will be in the air, and you will just have a mist of water that's filled with nutrients. This is how you're going to feed your plants. So there are many kinds of growing systems, but I bet that all of you here gardening are using cultivation directly in the ground. So, and just for your information, in Quebec, the legislation, so if you want to be a certified organic grower, you have to be growing in the ground. You have to be in the soil, because it's the basic principle is that if you want to be doing agroecology, if you want to tell people that you are organic, you cannot use techniques such as hydroponic and aeroponic. So let's assume that we're going to be, from now on, we're going to be growing plants in the soil using the nutrients that are in the soil. So these are the plant's needs. And I added one last, it's oxygen. So plants are like us, they are aerobic organisms. So their cells need oxygen to be able to function. So this is really important when it comes to the soil and the watering part. So if you are compacting your soil too much, there won't be macropores in the ground that allow air to be present around the roots. And this is really important. You don't want to compact your soil because you want to have oxygen for the roots. And this is also why plants that you water too much will wilt, because the roots don't have access to oxygen, so they can't be absorbing nutrients. They're just drowning. So watering, there can be too much water. That's possible. And I had friends once trying to grow a peach tree, and my friend was like, she planted it, and I think it was in summer, and next spring it was dead. And when I went to her house, I saw where she planted it. It was in a puddle of water, like a little pool of water in the ground. I was like, why did you plant your tree over there? It's like the worst place. And she told me, well, peaches are fleshy, they're full of water, so I figured that I should plant my tree in a place where there was lots of water. I was like, yeah, there are some aquatic plants, but trees are not. They really need oxygens for their roots. So please do not plant fruit trees in the middle of water. They really will die every time. So these are the plant's needs, and by knowing these, we're going to try to do a good planning of the garden to avoid plants problems. So what are the main plants problems? The first one that comes to mind is diseases. There's also insect pests and physiological disorders. These are the three types of problems that plants can have. So one little trick to recognize a disease: not all spots on leaves are signs of disease. Some are signs of other things that we'll look at after. So just a quick trick. If you want to know if the leaf on your spot is a disease. Most of the time, the spots from a disease will have a hollow, like a darker circle around the spots. So if we see here, this is oidium. It's a fungal disease, and this is on tomato plants. So you have a kind of yellowish brown pale spot, and around it you have a halo that's dark brown. So this is a good sign that it is a plant disease. And then you can have insect pests that will attack your plants. I'm sorry, everyone, you don't see, but my youngest is running on the balcony beside me, and she's super happy. It doesn't realize I'm in the midst of talking to you. All right, so this is the Jardinier Paresseux. It's a super good source of information for every gardener. And sometimes with insect pests, you will either see the insect itself, but most of the time you will see the damages that it does. So here we have a good example of damages on a Swiss chard leaf. This is done by the larva of a fly. So this fly will put its eggs like this below the leaf. And then when the eggs hatch, the larva like this. It's like the caterpillar for a butterfly, but this is for a caterpillar for a butterfly, but this is a larva for a fly. And it's going to do mines. It's going to eat its way inside the leaf. So you don't see anything going on. We just see these traces on the leaf. So this is an insect doing it. It's not a disease. It's not a round spot with a hollow. This is an insect, a symptom of an insect. So, and different insects can do damages at different growth stage. Some will do damages both at larval and adult stage, some only larval stage, some only adult stage. It really depends on the insect. So last category of problems is physiological disorders. So the most important problems that we encounter in this category are deficiencies. So this is when your plant will lack nutrients. So this here is super interesting because it's a resume of all the deficiencies you can have, and you can see that it's divided into old growth and new growth. This is because the different nutrients will have their symptoms on either old or new leaves, depending of the nutrients. So it's one of the signs you want to look for. So the most common deficiency that you will meet is the nitrogen. The nitrogen is the most important nutrient for the plants, and it's always the first one lacking most of the time. So you will see pale green, even yellow leaves. So this is a sign of nitrogen deficiency. Whereas a magnesium deficiency, you will see the leaf will become yellow, but the veins will remain green. And these two are super important because the chlorophyll molecule is at its center, it is magnesium, and it is surrounded by 4 nitrogen. So these 2 nutrients are really important for plants and are often like the first ones lacking. And then, so if you don't have spots, but rather have different colors, weird colors, like purple is a sign of deficiency in phosphorus. So you can look into diseases, you can look into insect pests, but you also have to think about deficiencies. There can also be frost, which is pretty obvious because, you know, in fall when it starts to be super cold, well, you don't have to search too far to find the responsible for the problem. It's the cold, it's the frost. You can also have lack of water. So we see here, this is probably a cucumber leaf. It's in the, well, at least it's in the Cucurbitaceae family. So all the squashes and zucchinis and cucumbers. So they really need a lot of water. And when they lack water, this is what it does. At the edges, it turns yellow towards the inside of the leaf. And then the tissue here is dying. So it becomes brown and really dry. So this is not a sign of disease. If you see that, don't go like, oh my God, there's a disease on my plant. No, it lacked water. You gave it water, but still it made some of the tissue die because there wasn't enough at some point. So it's all right. It's not a disease, just water your plant thoroughly. And another one that you can have is a sunburn. So yeah, plants can have sunburns just like us, especially when you take them out of the home, of the house, and you transplant them outside in spring. If you didn't do a proper acclimatation, they will most likely have a sunburn. And it looks a bit like this. Some plants will be more like pale yellow white, and some get more like this one here. It's kind of bronzing. It's kind of, yeah, bronze color. So these are the different types of problems that you can encounter. Just want to show you a quick resource here that's called Iris Phytoprotection. I'm thinking right now, can we translate? Is it available in English? I'm not sure. For those of you who speak English, I think you'd have to find the French word or the Latin word for the thing you're searching for, and then use the website and then do the translation back, because I don't see any English button. No, sorry about that. It still is a super good reference because you can come here and do rechercher, so research, and you're like, I have symptoms and damages on my plants. This is what I want to search for. And the culture, what crop is it? Oh, I have problem with my lettuce. So let's look at laitue, which is lettuce. And let's look at the part where we have problems. I have problems on the leaves. So you're telling the system I have problems on my lettuce, on the leaves, and I want to see all the different types of causes, all the different causes possible, and you will get a list with pictures and French and Latin name, which is super useful. And what's also super interesting is that if you click on them, you will have the name French, English, Latin, all sorts of information, and how you can fight, how you can solve that problem. And what's interesting is that these plants were tested in the laboratory, so you're sure that the image you see, the symptoms that you see are related to the disease itself. Because sometimes on the internet, I see the same picture associated with a couple different diseases. So it's not always super relevant information. It's not always good information. So this one, if it says that this is botrytis, it's because it has been tested and it's really what it looks like on lettuce. So this is like a super, super good source of information for you for diseases, physiological disorders, and insect pests as well. And they have a whole section on weeds, which is really interesting too. So back to our presentation. So now we've looked at plants' needs and what are the main problems that plants encounter. So we're ready to do a good planning of the garden to prevent these problems. So the first thing you want to do as a gardener, if you want to be a lazy, efficient gardener, you're going to be choosing the right crops. So the saying goes like this: the right plant for the right space. So as we said earlier, the most limiting factor is light. So this is what you want to look at first. So if your balcony is facing north, you won't have any direct sun or very few hours of sunlight, which is different if you're facing south. So you have to keep in mind that the fruit producing vegetables like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, cucumbers, they need 8 hours of light per day of direct sunlight. Whereas leaf producing vegetables, we go down to 4 to 6 hours per day. So if you don't have that amount of sunlight, you can still be growing tomatoes. You will be growing green tomatoes and you will be putting more efforts. So it is possible, but you won't have that much success. It's not going to be as fun and easy as if you would be growing the right plant for the right space. So if you don't have a lot of light, it's better that you head for leaf-producing vegetables like spinach, Swiss chard, lettuce. Fine herbs do fine too. Kale is thriving, so it reduces the scope of what you can grow, but you're gonna have more fun because it is adequate for these plants. So first, how much light do you get? Then you want to group plants per family. So for example, all the solanaceae, this is the tomato family. So you have tomato, pepper, eggplant. This is one family. You should plant them, if you are in planters or in the ground, you should plant them close all together. And then the next planter beside you, it can be the cucurbitaceae, the cukes family, cucumbers, zucchinis, squashes. You plant them together. And then the other one beside can be brassicaceae. This is the cabbage families. You have cabbage, kale. So you plant them together. We do this. We group plants per family because we want to do family rotation from year to year, because this will allow you to break disease and pest cycles. So for example, if you get, let's say, oidium on your tomato plants, and you always grow tomatoes in the same planter or the same gardening bed, the leaves with the disease that fall down to the ground and that overwinter, the following year, it is most likely that the fungus on these dead leaves, it's still like it's dormant in the ground, and when the heat comes, it's going to start growing and it will shed spores and it will infect your tomato plant again. So you will get the disease every year. Whereas if you move your tomatoes from one planter to another, or from one garden bed to another from year to year, it's going to be harder. It's not impossible. It's going to be harder for the fungus to jump 5 meters away to go infect the tomatoes over there in the other part of the garden. So grouping makes it easier to move plants around according to, following their family, and to break disease and pest cycles. This is why we do this, and this is also why we use companion crops. So if I do this here, yeah. So we have here examples of companionship that you can do in the garden. So here we have tomatoes and basil, onions and lettuces, and carrots and parsley. And the green part is the engrais, it's a green manure. This is another thing we're going to look at in fertilization. So we use companion crops because they will help, like, if I am an insect and I am a fly and I lay my eggs in onion leaves and I see a big patch of only onions, it's very easy for me to spot it and lay my eggs. And I'm gonna ruin it, but it doesn't matter. I'm happy. I can reproduce myself. Whereas if your onions are companion crops of lettuces, and I have some with peas in my garden too, they're like scattered amongst different plants. It makes it harder for the insect pest to find their favorite crop. So this is why we do this. We also do that to attract pollinators, and it can also be to directly deter some pests. Some plants have a strong smell that will just either deter the insect pest or just confuse them. They're not going to be, it's going to smell so strong of some plants that they won't be able to find their favorite crop amongst all that smell. So grouping per family and using companion crops. This is really, really good way to prevent disease and pests. It's way more easier than trying to deal with fungus disease once they're on and trying to use ecological fungicide. It's way easier to prevent. The other thing to respect plants' needs when we plant the garden is respecting the spacing between plants. This is one that's hard to achieve because when we start the gardens, all the plants are super small and we feel like the garden is empty and we want it to look full, and we stress a little bit about that. So we tend to plant our plants too close together. So when we do this, we don't respect their needs. We don't meet their needs because they have too much competition for light, water, nutrients, even carbon dioxide if they're planted too close together. So it really is important to respect that. There are lots of tables. I think Mathieu, after the workshop, will be able to share a link to a tableau d'espacement. But it's not that bad if during the summer you realize that you planted your plants too close. You can always move some around, and so it's not the end of the world. It doesn't really matter, but you're gonna like save time and energy by just respecting the spacing, because you give your plants you respect all their needs. So one other thing you can use is verticality. That allows you to save space. So for example, on the image here, on the trellis, you could have cucumbers climbing. So they use the verticality and they have access to the light that they need, whereas you could grow lettuces above. So these would get a semi-shady environment, which is what they prefer. And you would be using all the space that's available to you. The only thing is that if you are, for example, on a balcony and you are planting tomatoes and peppers, just make sure that the highest plant is behind, so it's not going to shade another plant that needs light too. And so now you have planned your garden, respecting plants' needs and preventing problems. And we are ready to go out, and we're going to prepare the soil and perform all the other tasks at the right time in the season. So if you're in the city, you have two options. You can have container gardens or directly in the soil gardens. So if you are having a container garden, you want to choose first what types of containers you want. So you have recycling bins, you can use smart pots, water reserve container, it can also be wooden planters. Just a quick note, if you're using a big planter, you want to level it. You want to make sure it's leveled, otherwise you're gonna have always too much water on one side and not enough water on the other side, which is not ideal. So really level your big planters. Otherwise, one super useful tool is a water reserve container. If you're in the city, we usually grow gardens on rooftops or balconies or on a concrete surface. It's really hot. That involves a lot of watering. So a water reserve container will really save you a lot of time. So I think we posted last week a design on our Facebook page, and that uses Rona pails for a water reserve container. It's super simple to achieve. So if whatever container you're using, you want to use 2/3 of potting mix and 1/3 of compost. This is a good combination to use. One important thing is you want to moisten the soil, the potting mix, while you're doing the filling, because otherwise it's going to be super hard to water, to get it moist down there. If you're using a big planter, really make sure you water during the filling, and just be careful not to compact the soil too much. As we said earlier, the roots need oxygen, so just make sure you mix it all together, but you don't press on it, you don't push on it. You don't want to compact your soil, especially if you are in a plastic container, because if you are in a smart pot, it's fabric, so there's air all around. So this is a very well aerated container. But if you're in a plastic container, really be careful with the compaction. So this is for a container garden. And the compost here, 1/3. This is the good proportion to use if you want to be giving your plants nutrients, but not too much. You can If you use only compost, it's going to be too rich for your roots, too rich for your plants, because you can have deficiencies, but there can be over fertilizing too. It's not good either. It's like for us, eating broccoli is good for your health, but eating broccoli all day long every day, it's not good. Like too much can be a problem too. If you are directly in the soil, if you have a clayey soil, you want to first start by breaking up the large pieces of clay, but then you're going to prepare cultivation beds. So this is what we see on the picture here. You have aisles here, and this is the cultivation bed. It's higher, so it allows the water to drain, and the soil gets a bit hotter this way. So normally your cultivation bed will be 75 centimeters large. This is the standard now in the all the different farms that produce organic vegetable baskets use that standard, 75 centimeters large. And as for amending, you want to add one compost bag, around 30 liters, every 1 or 2 meters square, and you incorporate slightly in the soil. So we're going to talk more about that during the soil and fertility workshops, as to how we decide if it's one compost for every 1 meter square or for every 2 meters square. The important thing to remember is that when you use compost, like we see here, this is a compost pile, this is a compost bag. When you use compost, you add carbon to the ground. When you add carbon to the ground, you create organic matter. The percentage of organic matter will increase over time. This is what ensures the long-term fertility of your soil. So the organic matter is what will give the plants nutrients in the long term. One other way to add organic matter, to add carbon to the ground, is by using mulching. So we have a picture here. We see dead leaves and straw. These are both super good mulches. I always recommend dead trees leaves because they're like the most locally available for mulching, and they're free, and they really work super well. So don't bother. You can buy things in the hardware stores, but really, if you can just rake around some leaves in the fall and keep them in a couple of bags for the next summer, they're really a good mulch. So now we amended the soil. So we gave nutrients to our plants. And then what about the water that they need? How do we do the watering? So the ideal watering time is in the morning, so that in the afternoon, when it gets super hot, you're sure that your plants won't lack water at that point. Because if you're watering, like most of us, we're super in a hurry in the morning to go to work, so we water at night. But then comes the night, the morning, and when comes the super heat in the afternoon, they might be lacking water, which is going to be a problem for some plants. So ideal watering time is morning. And I had someone once, when I was a facilitator in collective gardens, that asked me, Caro, how many milliliters of water do I have to give every plant today? And I was like, I can't answer that question. I don't know. Let's look at how we make that decision of how much water to give. So the first thing you have to look at is the type of soil. Obviously, if you are in a container, you're using potting mix which retains water pretty well. But if you are directly in the soil, in the ground, if you have a sandy soil, you have to water more, just because sand doesn't keep water. It drains very quickly. And then the species is important, the type of crops. So if you have a cucumber or a tomato plant, they really need a lot of water. They do a lot of evapotranspiration. Whereas if you have a lavender plant that comes from the south of France and that likes drier weather, you don't want to water it too much. That's another thing you need to know. Then there's the growth stage. So if you have a tiny baby seedling, don't water it too much. It's gonna drown. So relax. Just put a little bit. It's gonna be fine with it. But if you have a huge mature tomato plant, obviously you need to water more. The climate is also going to be something important. If it's going to be hot and dry with no rain for a while, you're going to be watering like we call that a firefighter. Watering like a firefighter means putting a lot of water. But if it's going to rain whole week, don't bother. Do another task in the garden. And one thing that will help you a lot, saving time on watering, is the mulch. If you're mulching your garden, it's going to keep more water in the ground. So that's really helpful. Just the only thing you have to be careful is that sometimes when the dew comes down in the morning on the mulch, it makes it look wet, it makes it look darker, and you kind of have the feeling, oh, it's sufficiently watered. I don't need to water it today. But you really, really need, the only way to really assess if there's enough water is to put the mulch aside and touch the ground and dig a little bit. Sometimes it's wet for an inch, the top inch is wet, and then it might be super dry. So it's really, really touch the ground and assess if you have a big plant that is that needs a lot of water. That's a crop that needs a lot of water. This is how you're going to decide how much water you give. Weeding, that's the most unpopular task in the garden. I know nobody who likes weeding, so if you are one of them, just mention your name in the chat. We're gonna invite you for a weeding session. And so why do we do weeding? We wanna provide our plants with enough light for one, but also access to enough water, nutrients, and carbon dioxide. It's always the same thing. So we want to offer our plants, our vegetables, less competition. So the weeding is important, especially at the seedling stage. When your vegetable plants are small, you want to make sure that they can grow bigger. And when they're bigger, they kind of they have outgrown the competition, so you can relax a bit more on weeding and ensure that there's a bit of competition. But at the beginning, you really try to keep your garden clean. And the other thing that's interesting is when you take a weed out of the ground and you put it in the compost bin or the city compost bin, all the nutrients that were present in this plant, in the leaves, you take them out of your system. You're taking your nutrients away. You're exporting them, which is not what you want. You want to keep your nutrients in the ground, in your production system. So you can use the chop and drop method. This is super easy. That's a super lazy one. So you can be just pulling out the weeds, and you put them on the ground, and they will dry under the sun, and they will decompose, and the nutrients that were in the plant itself will return to the ground. So that works like a charm. One last thing about weeds is that, well, we call them weeds because they're not the plants that we intend to grow. We don't see them as useful for us, and we don't want to have them around. We prefer other types of plants. But sometimes most of the weeds are in fact useful to us, or if not to us, at least to other organisms. So for example, we have dandelions for pollinators. So dandelions are it's a staple crop for pollinators. So when other flowers are done blooming, dandelions are always there. So it's really important to let them there so that they can feed pollinators. And also, anyway, dandelions, you can eat the leaves, you can make jelly and wine out of the flowers, and you can use the root and not dry it, but like roast it and use it as a coffee substitution. So it's a very useful plant even for us. And there's also purslane and lamb's quarter. Purslane it looks like a succulent, and it's super crunchy and fresh. It's very, very good. And the lamb's quarter is kind of a pale, soft green, and the top leaves are white, and it has a mild taste. So once you learn to recognize them, you can keep patches of these weeds in your garden and start using them. So they are very, very, they are a good addition to a vegetable garden. So the last keywords, the last useful metaphors in the garden are thinning, pinching, and harvesting. So I don't know if everyone is comfortable with the term thinning in the garden. It is when you sow tight the seeds and then you give space by picking some of the plants out. So is that a waste? So if we look here, we have an envelope of dill. The seed spacing here, it says 1 inch, but then here you have thin seedlings when they are 2 or 3 inches in height, with the final spacing of the plants 8 inches apart. So this tells us that you have to, 1 in 8 seeds will be kept. All the others will be taken away. Why would we do that? The first thing is that not all seeds will germinate. So if you plant more seeds, you're more likely to have a good crop in the end. The other thing is that, well, when you thin and you take out some seedlings, is you want to make sure that you are giving enough space for this particular crop. So for dill, in order to have enough light, water, nutrients, and carbon dioxide, and have all its needs filled, you need to give 8 inches for each plant. The other thing, one last thing, is that when you're picking out the seedlings, when you're thinning, you're not gonna take out any seedling. You're gonna take out the weakest, and you're gonna keep the strongest. So doing this, you are in fact doing some genetical selection. So you get to choose the best crops for your precise location, the ones that perform best. And if at the end of the season you harvest the seeds of these plants that you selected, in the time you're gonna get varieties that are really, really fine-tuned with your own garden. So this is really an important thing. Do not thin without looking correctly. You really take the time to choose every 8 inches which plant is the best to be kept. That's the thinning, so it's not a waste. It's really important to do it. Pinching. We do this mostly with fine herbs. We take off the flowers at the tip of a branch of a stem. So why do we do this? So if we look at a plant here, this is a basil stem. We have nodes here. The growing point of the stem is at the tip here. So when the flower comes out, we're gonna pinch it. We're gonna take it away. First, well, you can eat the flowers. They're good. The other thing, when we do this, instead of growing upward like this, the stem, we're sending a chemical message. We're telling the plant, stop growing from that growing point and start growing from these ones here, these nodes. So what will happen is that your basil plant, instead of being sleek and long and tall, it would start to have more branches, more lateral stems, so it would be more bushy. So if you do this constantly during the summer, you will get, in the end, you will get more basil, you will get more leaves, way more than if you just let them grow super tall and make flowers. So really, this is a super interesting task to do, pinching fine herbs. And at the end of the season, you'll get more pesto. Trust me, we've done it in the garden the whole summer, and we had shrubs of basil. It was amazing. The base of the stem was wood. It was woody. It was so huge. I couldn't feel like it was. We did put in the garbage bag to bring it to the kitchen. It wasn't fitting in the garbage bag. It was too big. So pinching. The last task, it might seem a bit obvious, harvesting. Like, Caro, come on, we know that we have to harvest. We do it just because we want to eat. This is the whole point of gardening. But there's another reason. In fact, when you are harvesting, you are using the plant's survival instinct in your favor. So all living organisms on Earth, they are genetically programmed to ensure the survival of the species, to ensure the next generation, to pass on genes. So for a plant, that means, okay, I'm a tomato plant and I'm growing leaves, and then I'm gonna do a flower, a couple of them, and then they will get pollinated by a bee or a bumblebee or a wasp or a fly, whatever. And this is going to turn into a fruit. And the fruit, in fact, is a protective envelope for the seeds. The seeds is the final objective of my life. I need to produce seeds because that's what it will ensure the next generation. So when this happens and you don't harvest your tomato, what happens is that it will fall to the ground over winter, and the next season, some tomato seedlings will germinate spontaneously in your garden. This is a tomato that fell to the ground, and the seeds did germinate by themselves. So if you are a plant and your objective is to ensure the next generation, once you're producing some fruits that are filled with seeds, your mission is accomplished. You can relax, you can lay back, you don't have to hurry up to make new flowers all the time. Your mission is accomplished. Whereas if you are, as a gardener, waiting too much between two harvests, this is what will happen. Your plants will be like, okay, mission accomplished, I can be on slow motion now. But if you go every day or every 2 days and you harvest everything that's ready at the moment, all the time, so you're continuously are harvesting, what happens is that the plant will go, next generation not insured. I'm losing my seeds, I have to make more. So it's gonna be making more flowers, and in the end you will get more yield, you will get more crops, more things to eat. So although it sounds obvious, it is really an interesting task to think about from the physiological point of view of a plant. So this is it. So now I'm gonna stop sharing. Go share, stop share. I take some time with you. I'm going to unmute. How do I do that? Participants. Can I unmute all at the same time? I don't mute. Okay, I did allow people to unmute themselves, so those who want to talk, you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'll be looking at the chat to see some questions. So I'm just gonna go up a bit. So Mathieu, est-ce que tu peux me dire, est-ce que tu es unmuté, Mathieu?
Oui.
OK, parfait. Est-ce que tu peux me dire où est-ce qu'on est rendu dans les questions dans le chat que tu n'as pas pu répondre?
Est-ce que tu as le Google Doc qui est ouvert?
Ouais, je peux aller voir.
C'est les rouges.
OK, donc, je suis pas dans la bonne fenêtre, excuse.
So I had some confusion between terreau and compost, because in English I think terreau is compost. So I was like, maybe you should like say what part of terreau and what part of compost people should add.
Yeah. So the compost is made from the decomposition of organic matter. So like vegetable peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, and it's super rich in nutrients. Whereas soil, a potting mix, the first ingredient is mousse de tourne. Would be, what is it in English? Mousse de sphagne. Peat moss. Thank you. It's peat moss. So this comes from bugs we have lots of them in the eastern part of Quebec and in the Maritimes. So you're going to drain the water out of the bugs, and then you're going to take the peat moss that's there. So it's dead plants that have the shape of fibers, and this is why they're super good when you use containers, is because they will retain water, but because they're fibers, they kind of intervene like this, but you are sure to have macropores with air, so they both give the plants water and enough air to the roots. So this is why you want to use potting mix first, because there's peat moss, and there's also, most of the time you see white, tiny, looks like rocks, they're called perlite, and this gives the plants lots of air for the roots. And they will also use, and then if you use the compost, it's nutrient rich, but it's too rich to be used alone. And the other thing is that it's like the pieces, the particles are too small, so it would be too compacted. There wouldn't be enough air for the roots. So that's why you need to use 2/3 of one and 1/3 of the other. It's really the good ratio to achieve good fertility and not over fertilize and have enough water and air for your roots. Là, je suis dans le, I'm in the document.
So, Caro,
yep.
pourrais-tu dire 1/3 de quoi et 2/3 de quoi il faut mettre exactement pour que les gens y sachent?
Sorry. 2/3 of potting mix and 1/3 of compost. You can be 60-40, but
someone said in the potting mix that we already have compost.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So you have to look at the ingredients list. It's like when you buy food, they have an ingredients list. And even if they have compost, they don't have a big proportion. So you can still add 1/3, because what I was going to say, some people use 50-50 or 60-40, but don't go over 50-50. 50-50 to me seems a bit high. So I would say 2/3 potting mix, 1/3 compost is the good ratio to keep. So I'm looking at the questions that are in red. Does sow mean plant put in the ground? Maybe it wasn't a good translation. Sowing is when you put the seed in the ground. So I don't know if the person that asked this question is still there. Maybe it's not, it's seeding.
I answered that, but I wasn't sure, so thank you for the confirmation.
Yeah. How to improve the nitrogen level? Well, on the short term, you're going to use first compost, and then you can use any fertilizer that the first number is pretty high. The first number, NPK, first number represents nitrogen. We're going to talk about that more in the next workshop. Green manures will help. You can also be doing the purin. How do you call that? When you mix some plants together and you let them degrade in water and you make your own fertilizer, that's going to add lots of nitrogen. And you can also be using blood meal and some other types of fertilizer. The important number is the first one in the 3 numbers. So I'm getting a phone call now because it's already 1 o'clock. So my meeting has started in the other part of the universe. So I will let you in the hands of Mathieu. Mathieu will make you host from now. And So those of you who want to unmute themselves and talk with Mathieu, you are free to do it now. And thank you for being here. Sorry I have to leave. I hope we'll meet again in some time. I wish you a good gardening season. Thanks for being here, and wish you a good day. Thank you.
Bye, Caro.
Bye.